Hello everyone, welcome to iFashi. In today's tutorial, we will be teaching us how to make this beautiful crop blazer jacket. We already posted the tutorial on how to make this beautiful pant trouser that I'm wearing here. This is a crop blazer, but with this tutorial, you will also get to learn how to make a full blazer with a notched collar. So if blazer making is something you're interested in, let's get right into it. Now here is my soft tweed fabric that I'll be using. I also have my suit lining that I'll be using, and we're going to start our drafting with the back piece first. We're drafting the back first because we would need the neck circumference of the back to draft the collar of the front. So that's why you see that anytime we're drafting blazer, we start with the back. So the first thing I'm marking here is the length of my blazer. So my half length for back is 16 inches, and I'll come down with 1 more inch. I would advise you come down with 2 more inches after your waistline for this crop blazer so it doesn't come out too short, right? So after getting my waistline out, the next line I'm getting is my bust line on this back. So from my shoulder to my bust is 10 inches. I'm marking that down. We don't need under bust for this back piece, right? So after the bust line, the next line we're going to get out is the chest line. Sometimes we go upwards with 2 inches from our bust line to determine the chest line. Also, you can divide your bust measurements by 6 and add 1.5. Then you get your chest line. That chest line is our armhole point, right? Now we're going to take our shoulder measurement divided by 2 on our shoulder line, then come down with 0.5 inches. Usually I come down with 1 inch for my shoulder slope, but because I want this shoulder to be high, I might end up adding a shoulder pad. That's why I just came down with 0.5 for shoulder slope. Now you also take your back neck measurement, that's the neck width. I'm using 3.3 here. In our previous tutorials, we've explained why we use 3.3 for our neck width measurement. This formula is gotten by dividing your bust measurement by 16, then you add 1 to your answer. That's how you get your neck circumference. So after that, I also took my shoulder measurements on the chest line and I connected my shoulder slope down to that shoulder measurement on the chest line. Now we have our armhole line out. So we're going to curve this armhole to get the armhole curve. So you divide what you have on this line by 2, then from the midpoint you make a curve down to the chest line. So for you to know where that curve is coming to, you're going to take your bust measurement divided by 4 for back. Usually after taking my bust measurement divided by 4, I remove 0.5 because there's no bust on the back. We don't want your back to be puffing. So I don't just divide by 4 equally, I remove 0.5. Also remember to add back that 0.5 to your front bust measurement when you're drafting your front. Also, on this my chest line on the armhole part, I'm going to come down with 0.5 because the armhole of a blazer is freer than normal armholes. Now we've carved out our armhole curve from the shoulder down to our bust measurement on the chest line. The next thing I'm taking here is my bust span divided by 2. My bust span is 8. When you divide 8 by 2 to give you 4, that's what I'm marking on my bust line and on my waistline. Now after getting out the bust span, you're going to determine where you want the stitch on your blazer to be. If you want it to be on the shoulder, you're going to divide your shoulder by 2, connect it to your bust line. But if you want the stitch to be on your armhole like a princess dart, connect it to meet that midpoint on the armhole line. Whichever you do is completely optional. But before we take that, we're going to take the waist dart. I'm removing 1.5 from my waistline for the waist dart. Then this 1.5, we're dividing it into 0.75 on the left and 0.75 on the right. After removing that, you now take your waist measurement. Remember to add back these darts. So if my waist is 7.5, the dart I removed is 1.5. Altogether, I'm supposed to have 9 inches on this waistline. On the chest line as well, take your bust measurement. Remember, I removed 0.5. Don't be confused. Remember to add it back to the front, 0.5. Then I connected from the waistline to meet my armhole. On this armhole, if you notice, we came down with 0.5 because the armhole of your blazer is not meant to be very tight. So now this is what we have. The center back is ready, the side back is ready. And as for the stitch I mentioned earlier, if you want it to be a princess dart, you connect it to meet your armhole. But if you want the dart to be on the shoulder, you connect it to meet the midpoint of your shoulder. This connection, make sure is not too curvy because this is the back piece. You don't want to have a puff there. So another thing I'm going to do on this back piece is to reduce the puffiness on the back on my waistline. I'm coming in with 0.5, just like we do to snatch our zipper, to make our zipper lay flat on our back. So I'll come in with 0.5 and connect it to meet my neckline. I just remembered we've not marked out the neckline. Back neckline is usually 1 inch. Just come down with 1 inch for the neck, from the neck, and then I made the connection to meet the 0.5 that I'll be cutting off from the waistline. Now this is what we have for our back piece. Another thing I'm going to do, remember this is why we drafted the back piece before the front. Measure what you have on this back neck line and write it down so that you don't forget. After measuring, I have 3.7 inches, which is almost 4 inches. I noted it so that when I'm drafting my front for the collar, I'll remember to use that same measurement for my back collar. So on this same pattern paper, I'll be dividing it into two to use the other side for my front pattern. Two things I need us to note when you're drafting your blazer. You're going to leave around 4 to 5 inches allowance at the beginning of your paper. This allowance will serve as our lapel allowance. This depends on how wide or big you want the lapel to be. You can leave 5 inches, you can leave 6 inches, whatever is remaining is fine. Another thing, on the upper part, which is this shoulder line, remember to also leave another 6 inches allowance. So you're going to come down from the beginning of your pattern paper with about 6 inches before you start drafting, before you mark out the shoulder line. So these two allowances are very necessary. The lapel allowance at the beginning of the paper and the main collar allowance at the top of the paper. I already started drafting, and when it got to the collar point, I realized where is my collar allowance. So before you start drafting your front, leave some allowance at the top, 6 inches, and then leave like 4 inches at the beginning of your paper. So now we're going to start drafting. From your shoulder, you take your bust measurement, that's the bust point. I'm using 10 inches for my bust point. I use 13 inches for the under bust and 18 inches for my front waistline. Remember, we used 17 for back. I'm marking 18 here. I'm going to rule out all these lines, then label them so we know what the line is for. This is the waistline / the length of the cropped blazer, and this is the under bust line, and then we have the bust line. After that, we mark out our chest line. Remember how we got the chest line for back? Divide your bust measurement by 6 and add 1.5. So you impute the answer coming down from your shoulder line. That gives you your correct armhole line. So the regular going up by 2 inches varies. It doesn't work for everybody. Now also on the shoulder line, you're going to take your shoulder measurement divided by 2. Come down with 0.5. Like I mentioned before, we usually come down with 1 inch, but I might end up putting a shoulder pad on this shoulder. That's why I don't want to slope it down too much. Also, I'm also taking my neck circumference, which is 3.3 like I used for front. I'll connect from my shoulder slope to meet my neckline, and then I also come down with the same 3.3 for the neck depth and mark it out. Now, after taking this neck, it was at this point I realized I did not leave out my allowance that I mentioned in the beginning. That's why I mentioned it, so that you don't, in case you are following back to back. So now here we are. I've added my pattern paper. My allowance for the lapel is at the beginning of my paper, and then my allowance for the collar is at the top of my paper. So now I'm going to just refresh on the whole thing we've taken before. From the shoulder line, I took 10 inches to my bust point line, and then from the shoulder line I took 13 inches to my under bust line. From the same shoulder line I took 18 inches to get my waist line. So this is what we have for the front, these lines. Also remember how we got the chest line. We divided our bust by 6 and added 1.5 to give us our chest line, which is our armhole line as well. Then for the shoulder measurement, I divided my shoulder 16 by 2. That gave me my 8 inches that I have there. We're going to move to the next one now by dividing this armhole line by 2 to get the midpoint, and then you come in on that point with 0.5 because we want to get our armhole curve. Now for us to know the point we are curving it to on the chest line, you're going to take your bust measurement there. Remember to add the 0.5 from the back, and then come down with 0.5 as well from this chest line, because I mentioned it when we're drafting the back pattern that the armhole for blazer or suit jackets, they are deeper than the normal armhole. It's not meant to be very tight. That's why we're coming down with 0.5. After this, you're going to take your bust span measurement, which is your nipple to nipple measurement, on your bust line, under bust and waistline, and then we'll go ahead and tighten the under bust. I'm using 1.5 inch to tighten my under bust, which is 0.75 on the left, 0.75 on the right. I'm also using the same thing to snatch my waistline, so I'm taking the same 1.5 on both the under bust and on the waistline. Now I'll use my straight ruler to connect these two 1.5 to meet each other. To tighten the under bust, I'm not supposed to use a straight ruler. You're going to use your curve ruler to curve it to give you the bust shape. So you're going to curve from the under bust to meet your bust line, the bust point line. So this is what we have so far. This is this dart on this under bust. We're going to be cutting it off. The next thing is to connect from the bust line to meet our midpoint of the armhole to give us that princess dart that we are following. I mentioned before, if you want the dart to be at the shoulder, connect it from this bust point to meet your shoulder. That's the midpoint of your shoulder. Now we're going to go ahead and take our body measurements, which is the bust measurement on the bust line divided by 4, then your waist measurement on the waistline divided by 4. Please remember to impute this waist dart, the 1.5, impute it back, and then you now connect it from the waistline to meet the armhole point. Now that we have our center front and side front out, the next thing we're going to take is our side bust dart. So remember, from my shoulder to my waist at the back is 17 and on the front we have 18. So that 1 inch difference, we're going to be removing it under the bust line so that when you join your front to back, it will be equal. So from the bust line, I came down with 1 inch and connected it to meet my bust point. So I'll be cutting that off. Now we have the center front and side front. We're going to focus on our lapel and the collar, and that will be all for this blazer. So at this point, I'm going to determine where I want my lapel to extend to on my center front. I came down with 2 inches from the under bust line. This depends on where you want your first button to be, right? So now I'll take that button extension. After coming down with 2 inches, I also came out from my straight line, from that center front line. I came out with 2 inches and I made this box here. This will serve as my button extension. This is very necessary because our blazer doesn't just end at the center front, right? So now I'm going to connect from this button extension with a broken line because I will not be needing it, right? I just want to get out that shape. I'll connect it to meet the beginning of my neckline from the shoulder. Now this is what we have. The next is to get out the width of our lapel. This depends on how wide you want your lapel to be. Lapel is that front collar, not the collar behind the neck, is the one in the center front. It's called a lapel. So I'm coming out with 3 inches because I don't want it to be too wide. So 3 inches is just okay for this particular project, right? Sometimes I use 4, depends on what I'm working on. So after coming out with that 3 inches, I'm going to connect it to meet this same beginning of my button extension. You can use your straight ruler for this. You can use your slightly curved ruler for this. But if you see the way I'm placing this, my ruler is not straight. It's not so straight and it's not curvy. So after marking out this point, my lapel is out. The reason I marked this broken line is to get the end of the lapel to see how wide it is. Now you see that our lapel is out. The next is to go to the neck and work on our neck collar. So remember the measurement we have for our back neckline, the 3.7. We're going to be needing it now. So from the beginning of this, your shoulder line on the front, on the neckline, you're going to go upwards with what you have on that back neckline. But first, I want to mark a guide because we don't need it to be straight. Your neck is not straight like this. So after marking out this straight guide, you come out with 0.5 before you now take this measurement and move it to that 0.5 so that it will be slanted. Now I'm placing my tape rule from my neck to that 0.5, which is 3.7 from the back. I moved that 3.7 from the back. So I'll now connect with my straight ruler to meet that 0.5. You see the way the neck came out? The back neck is not very straight, so we're not using that straight line. That was just a guide to know how to slant this neckline. Now we've marked out our 3.7. I'm also going to use 4 inches as the width of that back neckline. So when you bend it down, you know this 4 inches is going to be bent down, right? So when you bend it down, it's not going to be 4 inches, please. Sometimes I use 5, but if you use anything lesser than 4 inches, when you bend your collar down, you might end up seeing it will hang and it will not cover the stitch you have on your neck. So 4 inches is the least that I use for most of my blazers. Now the next thing we're going to work on is to get out the lapel notch. This V shape we have on our collar is called a lapel notch. This is what we're going to be getting out now. I came out with 1 inch from the beginning of my center front. Remember, this straight line is my center front. I came out with 1 inch on that my lapel extension, right? Then I marked the 1 inch upwards. The space in between these two is 1.5 inches. It's not so wide. After that, then I'll use my slightly curved ruler to connect from this point to meet the back neck that we marked out before. Now we have the collar out and our lapel is out. So I'm just going to label the two of them. We'll have the collar on the upper part and then the lapel on the down part. Thank you so much for watching to this point. Remember to subscribe if you haven't done that. This blazer tutorial is really detailed. With this tutorial, you can confidently draft and make a full blazer with a notched collar. All you have to do is just extend the length from this cropped length to whichever length you want. We have our back out and the front is out. The next thing I'm going to do now is to go ahead and cut out my pattern paper. So I'm starting with the back. I'll cut out all of the darts that will not be needing. The center back is out, then the side back as well. Then I will now work on the front. For this front, remember we need to close this side bust darts. So I'm going to tear it open on that side bust and then I'll use my paper tape to tape it down. After taping down this side bust, you will notice the line are no longer aligned. The lines we have from the under bust to the armhole is no longer aligned. So you're going to introduce your ruler to connect from the under bust to meet your armhole to have an aligned line there. And then I'll continue with my cutting. Watch closely to see what I'm cutting and how I am cutting it so that you will see the darts that we're taking out. Now remember these marks that I have here. I'm going to highlight these marks that we have here because they are very important when we are joining our collar to our center front. So that's why we're marking it out. We're also going to highlight these lines on the main fabric itself because those 2 points has to align so that you will not have problems. Now we have the center front and the collar out. Then we have the center back and the side back as well. Now, as you can see, our side back and our side front aligns even after taking out the 1 inch side bust dart. That's because we drafted with our correct measurement. Now when you're cutting on your fabric, remember this collar is going to be cut on fold. This upper part of the collar that sits on the back, please cut it on fold, this part, right? Now I'm going to prep my fabric. By prepping fabric, I mean ironing the fabric. Iron estee to your fabric, iron your lining. This is my suit lining. I did not add estee to the suit lining, but the fabric itself, I added estee before cutting. Remember to add your allowance, your sewing allowance when you're cutting on fabric because we don't have our sewing allowance on our pattern paper. And mind you, sewing allowance differs. It depends on what you can work with, what you're comfortable working with. Whatever sewing allowance you add, please sew with that sewing allowance. For me, I have 0.5 on the neckline sewing allowance, and on the side I have 1 inch sewing allowance. But I just know that this is why I added to this point, this is why I added to this point. So when I'm sewing, I follow my sewing allowance. Now I have my side front, both the lining and main fabric. I have my center front, both the lining and main fabric, and then the collar as well. I'm using the main fabric for both lining, for collar and main fabric, even my center front, because when you open up your collar, it is the lining that comes out. So endeavor to use your main fabric as your center front lining as well, so that your lining doesn't end up coming out as your main collar. Also remember to mark out those notches we made earlier on our pattern. Now here is the sleeves that I'll be using for this project. Is a 2-piece sleeve. We have a tutorial on how to draft this 2-piece sleeve on the channel, and the link will be in the description box on this video. If you want to use a single sleeve like this pattern I'm holding, you can go ahead and also use a single sleeve, but whenever I'm working on a blazer jacket, I like to use my double sleeve, my 2-piece sleeve. So the tutorial is linked to the description box. Check it out and see how we drafted the 2-piece sleeve. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin out these fabrics the way it's going to be stitched on the sewing machine. But before I pin it out, I like to use this my marker to mark out my sewing allowance, so that when I'm sewing, I'm seeing exactly the lines I'm following. You might see this as a waste of time, but it's actually very important, so that when you are sewing, you follow your exact seam allowance, and then you don't end up having any issues with losing or fitting. So I'm pinning down the both of my center backs together. I'm pinning it down the way it's going to be sewn, and then I also pinning my side back to the center back, the way I'm going to be stitching them on the sewing machine. I'll repeat the same thing for the front. Pin your side front to the center front, the way it's going to be stitched. I've also marked out the sewing allowance that I'll be following on this one. Then after pinning all of them together, the sewing tutorial cannot fit into this video. We'll be dropping a part 2 of how we finished this tutorial, how we stitched all these pieces together, how we attached the sleeves and the collar, especially the collar fitting, how we fitted the collar into the blazer jacket. And after sewing our beautiful cropped blazer jacket, this is the beautiful blazer that we made in this tutorial, guys. Kindly stay tuned for the part 2 of this tutorial to see how we made everything from start to finish. Thank you so much for watching to this point, guys. I really appreciate. Remember to like this video, share this video, and drop a comment on what you'd like us to be making next. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, guys. Remember to turn on your notifications so that you'll be notified whenever we drop a tutorial. Remember to also check out the pants trouser tutorial. I'll be seeing you in the part 2 of this tutorial. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.